Welcome back. This is going to be a remake of a video that I just did the other day, which was for Intrusions, and it also included some plays on Mystique and how to avoid her deception shenanigans on turn 0 and turn 1 and all that other stuff, right? But I felt it was a little bit busy for one video. I got a little bit, I don't know, should we say, uh, I don't know, maybe distracted is a good way to make up for a mistake that I had made. Um, just not quite thinking all the way through on it. So we're going to try to do this a little bit more quickly, taking into mind and account some of the feedback that have been provided by some folks, and starting off on basically going with squad selection and how that's determined on Intrusions, which is a 19 threat secure that is very commonly taken in Guardians rosters. So starting off on just kind of talking about Intrusions, right? The the biggest thing to kind of be mindful about with this is that this is a very kind of brawly crisis that tends to get models pretty drastically clumped up together. And so if you've watched the other two videos on demons, or especially Intrusions, or the video that I talked about, where we're wanting to run lanes, right, and we're trying to keep our opponent maybe on their backside of on their board, so that way we can get them kind of collapsed in together and all that stuff. It's a lot harder to accomplish those things on this crisis. Now the lanes are still available, but because of ability to kind of teleport around and all that stuff, you don't quite get the advantage that you might otherwise be able to get on something like a D shape or a B shape. Now, with that being said, this is still an excellent crisis for Guardians and it's very popular for Guardians. And the real biggest reason is that it's really low scoring. Demons is kind of the best of both for what Guardians really like, in that it's very low scoring, and we get a great advantage on it due to some of the things that are in the affiliation, and a really great splash like Ghost Rider. And Infinity is just a really great crisis that works well for Guardians, and I think their overall game plan of trying to bully a portion of the board, maybe allow a little bit of scoring, but really turn up the offense and just remove models. I think Infinity lends itself to that, and then some of the other things at Guardians. So with this, I don't think this plays to our strengths as much as Infinity does, but it is a little bit lower scoring, and there's not quite as much of a benefit from it for the opposing team. Like if you're working the Infinity Crisis, you're getting that extra power, and so is your opponent, right? So there is some benefit for them. This is a little bit more neutral on the benefit and low scoring, so you just got to be able to play it correctly and really watch your matchups. And what I'm trying to say there is that, while I think there's a preferred core or a certain preferred amount of players that I would very regularly use on Infinity, that's just not the case here on Intrusions. I mean, that would be the case on Demons as well, but not the case on Intrusions. If you've watched a few of these, you've probably heard me say that most of your games, your core should just consist of Star-Lord and Bill, and then just go from there depending on matchup and crisis. All of these models can be successful on this crisis, but we have to keep in mind like the nature of the crisis and what it does. So the best defensive character that we've got, and just all rounder, is by far Beta Ray Bill. He's probably the best fourth threat in the game, to be honest with you, just due to his all-around skill set. And he's just fantastic on crisis like this. He's going to score your points, and he's going to be putting in work. And he's going to be able to hold that secure for you that you kind of really desperately need. And you can basically put him anywhere, and he doesn't really have bad matchups, right? Agent Venom, on the other hand, does have bad matchups. For example, he is terrified of a Psylocke, right? I think she tears him up pretty bad for a number of reasons, but her stealth and movement ability, and just getting the rerolls into him. There's a number of models that can get in there and just get some energy damage onto him. Range models like an opposing rocket. Green Goblin can do some pretty bad stuff to Agent Venom. A lot of models, right? So we have to be really mindful of that, right? And in understanding like what your opponent might be bringing to this crisis, you just have to understand how the crisis works. If there's an X-Men team out here and they see Guardians, like, they might reasonably assume that you're going to be running a Groot or an Agent Venom, so I would expect to see a Psylocke out there if they've got one in a roster, right? Same thing with Rogue. I think she would be phenomenal on this crisis and could do some pretty bad things to a Guardians team because she's got that energy choice as well. So it really depends on what your opponent's bringing to the table, and that's going to determine what your roster consists of. But if you start out with Star-Lord and Bill, you can take a look at what your opponent's got there, and you can reasonably assume and guess at what they're going to be doing after that, right? The other thing to consider is that, with this being a Brawly crisis, they're going to have maybe more Brawly models. There's not going to be so much of a range thing going on. And honestly, I think that's something that we can kind of use to our advantage with some of our ranged models, especially as Star-Lord. Or, honestly, an Agent Venom if you can get him in the right matchup. But the real key models that we're looking to try to get out of here, again, Star-Lord, Bill, so that gets us up to 7 points. If you see this kind of threat level thing up there, we'll kind of bounce around on that. But we're going to start out at 15. And it just really depends on what you're trying to do with your opponent, right? Drax doesn't have a lot of bad matchups. And, he can be a really great add-in here, right? And we can go any number of different directions by adding in a Drax. I don't think that Ghost Rider is that great in this particular circumstance because he's only going to have Drax that he can really sacrifice, right? So we don't want to just do that 4 wide, but you could do a Rocket and a Groot here. And I think that this would be a phenomenal way to play Intrusions at 15. This even has play into some of the taller kaiju lists because you've got 2 size 4 throws, and it's just a lot of models for them to have to chew through, right? So this is a pretty good list. Other options, of course, I think Gamora's got some serious game here. You do have to kind of be looking out for maybe models that can really kind of spike out on her, or that's really it with her. Like, her defense is okay, martial prowess is an okay ability, but it doesn't work that well against the giant dice pool attacks. So she's not that great into the kaiju folks, the Malekiths of the world, and Immortal Hulks. She just does a ton of damage, but I just don't think she has enough survivability, and she doesn't have any sort of displacement. One thing that can make her good on this, in particular though, if you're going into a wide team, let's say that you see like maybe an X-Men squad out here that's going to try to meet you in width, or a Shield team, I think Shield in particular, she could be extremely good into. You don't necessarily need the displacement, but her Spender would just be phenomenal on this crisis because of the clumping, right? It's going to do a lot of damage. The Cosmic Assassin in particular, what you get is that automatic rapid strike. It's just excellent on this crisis. So if we're seeing something like a Shield, I think you could run something like this. And there's a chance that they're going to be 4 to 5 wide as well. More than likely 5 wide. They don't come in stacked up with a ton of energy attacks. This could be a very safe place to drop in an Agent Venom. Okay. Another option here that isn't terrible, believe it or not, is the Nebula Rocket here. Nebula just provides you the ability to pivot between 2 points and kill off models, while Rocket can sit back with Star-Lord and pick stuff off, maybe hold an extract if you're lucky to get one on him early enough and back him out, right? With a 2 threat, you don't necessarily mind if you're just sitting back not doing much. But that, even though it's going to be a little bit harder for us to kind of win the secure game at 15, this does provide you the ability to kill off other models and at least tie a lot of them, or maybe win them. But we'll kind of get into that strategy in a bit. With that being said, I will just kind of give you a bit of a sneak peek at what we're trying to accomplish here. Again, it's almost like regardless of what the extract is, we're trying to win at least a guarantee that we win one of the flanks, and then either tie or win the middle on Intrusions. It's really important. So it's actually possible to do there. Again, if you get the right matchups, that's what it all really is. 16, you get a little bit more options starting to open up. In the same way that a rocket and nebula type mix here can work because of the damage output, this can work. Cosmic Ghost Rider, you know, he doesn't obviously contest things early on, but with this being a C-shaped secure, people are going to be really hard pressed to want to bring a model up on that center line too early when you have Cosmic Ghost Rider just pulling and chaining them around on turn 1 and blasting the brakes off them, right? With this team only being 4 wide at 16, depending on what you run into, you could be seeing yourself maintaining a good amount of priority throughout a game, right? Again, it depends on the list, so you got to kind of know what your opponent's tendencies are and how they've built their squads. So this is not bad. It's not going to be good on a heavy extract thing. I think the Rocket Nebula thing's got a little bit more game at 15 than this, but this certainly works. Moving off of that, you can immediately go over back here to Gamora, who's a little bit more well-rounded defensively. She can kind of prevent herself from getting dogpiled onto, and I think she's going to get a lot of benefit out of martial prowess against small dice pool teams. So you can go from there. You can plug in a Nebula. You can plug in a Rocket if you're wanting to, grab one of these secures. In this case, we've got Mutant Madmen, so it's possible that Rocket could easily grab one of those and back up and just be able to, sit himself around. 17, there's a very tried and true list that I'm a big fan of that you guys have probably seen several times now. And this is, I think where you're going to start to see the entry level of a Ghost Rider. This does work at 16 as well, but it involves Drax up there. I think Bill is just better, and I feel more comfortable with this. But this, is also not bad at 16, right? But, one of my favorite 17s right here. It's just, the reason why this works so well is because of the speed of Ghost Rider, having Wicked Judgment, being able to be over here in between, two of these points. And he also, because of that large base, if he sits in between stuff, obviously he can move around and do what he needs to do as far as maybe helping out, as far as securing things. But more importantly, with that large base, right, he's going to be providing you the ability to hit potentially models on both of those points. And so you get a lot of use out of that range 3 attack on a large base. So just a really big fan of this. 18, you can pivot off of that and automatically go here. I think you've got enough models to get onto those secures and potentially win them, and maybe not have Cosmic being able to assist you there. So it can work. You just really need to rely on him pulling other models off there and deleting the models when you need them, because more than likely with this setup, Bill's going to be on a point by himself with no help, right? And Rocket and Groot are going to be off on a flank. So, at 18, you can see that I generally want to kind of reach for Drax on these a lot because it's a brawly crisis. He's going to be up there. Another model that you're going to see me like to reach for a lot is Gamora because, again, brawly, she's got that going on. If you get the right matchups, this can also be extraordinarily good. So you just get a ton of options here, but you've got to know your matchups. Cosmic Ghost Rider doesn't necessarily have that bad of matchups. You can plug him in a lot of places. You just have to be prepared to know which models you need to move off and how you can kind of win and keep close on that secure game. And more importantly, like if you're playing on something here like Senators, how am I going to stop my opponent from getting a 4-2 advantage on those? Because that is exactly what we do not want to see. We've got to try to break parity on this. And so It's going to be a tough crisis for him, but it can work if the damage output is there. I think this roster, again, right here, you're at a nice 5 wide. If you've got a spot to where you can comfortably have Agent Venom, and we're not having like a Psylocke or a Rogue out there, or maybe even a Hawkeye to bully him from range, or a number of these energy characters that maybe could put status effects on them too. Like, we don't want to see that. But if you can avoid some of that, again, I think Shield's a good matchup. Certain Brotherhood can be really good matchups. All that stuff. Teams that are heavy on the physical attacks, there's nothing that says that he can't be a bit of a frontline helper model, right? Up on point. So he can be really decent there on this. And to be honest with you, with the way that this crisis clumps up, I've mentioned this a little bit in Discord chats with folks and other people, but I think his beam is just is amazing in the right circumstances. And Intrusions is an amazing circumstance to be able to pull this beam out and just do horrifying things, right? So, that being said, like, if you're not, playing them all that aggressively at the beginning of the game, you can sit back, lob out some incendiary grenades, but I think you want to be doing like one and then the builder, right? So you lead off with an incendiary grenade and then a builder if you can. If you're sitting out at range 3 and you're not contesting things for a round or two while you're attacking and building up your power, there's a good chance opponents are not going to be attacking you back because you're not contributing to scoring. You just want to make sure that you're able to help out Bill or Drax, whichever one of these models that's going to be on a lone point by themselves. They need to be augmented by having, models get dazed from there or there, right? If you're bringing in Agent Venom. Now, later in the game, like around 3 or 4, you can bring them up in there, and that's when that symbiote special forces attack comes in. So range 3 beam. Most real special thing about that is, if you pop into a situation on these, because there's just going to be models clumped all over the place, and you pull that beam out. I've had games and situations where I've brought that beam out, and I've done 3, so I've beamed into 4 people. One of them's usually out of the the range 2, right? So you start off with that one, and you might have, 2 or 3 models that are within range 2. When you've got roughly a 60% chance to hit your trigger for the tendrils, the lashing tendrils, you're getting a free damage off of that. So I've certainly had circumstances where he's done 3 damage to a model before he even attacks them with the beam, right? That's just phenomenal value. I mean, that's pretty fortunate. You getting your trigger every time. It's not unheard of, but it certainly happens, right? So moving past this 18, we're going to be looking at a 19 list. You can scale this a little bit differently in that, basically, no, it doesn't actually work. You can plug in a Ghost Rider and then go back to Drax. Only problem with this, again, you end up with that. So that doesn't work. So what do we do typically on this crisis at threat level? Go back to my old favorite, except we just add Nebula. This works phenomenally. Because you now have the 2/2 threats out there. You don't necessarily need Nebula to be scoring on this because of your width, and you have models and a Ghost Rider with the flexibility and ability to just jump in and help out on the secures anytime you want. Okay. Other option, I don't necessarily believe in running these 2 together very often. Excuse me, get out of there, Nebula. This actually works. This can work fairly well, but again, the problem that you run into is how many extracts are there, right? In this case, there's a lot, and where are they located in the center of the board? Am I comfortable having Rocket and Groot being in the center of the board? We're most likely their premier beater model with probably their control and all their kind of bells and whistles are going to be going. Probably not, because they're going to get displaced and they're going to get deleted real fast, in particular Rocket. So the thing that works best is making sure you have your own beater there, which is Bill for us, that has that control, all that other stuff. Best way to put him out there and still get your benefits of Deal with the Devil is right here. Other options that exist here, of course, you can go off of that. And then we can kind of do some exotic and weird stuff if we want to. I haven't talked about this enough, but this is certainly an option. It gives you, 3 bodies to work secures. You pretty much got to figure, again, like I've said several times, you're going to have a hard time with the extracts, but at least we've got 3 bodies for it here now. They're all relatively tough, and it's certainly possible to do. This can open up a good situation where you can bring in We Are Groot, but considering some of the tactics cards and things that we have available to ourselves with bringing in other models that are just powerful combinations. If we go with that other one, you've got Deal with the Devil and Deadly Duo on top of Galaxy's Greatest with your 2 restricted cards. This is not as powerful as that. If we figure out a way to get Agent Venom on the table, that opens up a foreign assignment. Right, so now we got 8 to work with. You could go Rocket Groot here. That's 19, sorry, Drax. This works as well. Now we've got a lot of bodies that can be up here kind of helping us work on things, and we're still having the benefit of bringing out 2 extraordinarily powerful tactics cards in addition to Galaxy's Greatest. And for me, 2 restricted cards in Galaxy's Greatest is almost like an auto loadout at this point, especially with so many affiliated models. But with a foreign assignment, you've got the ability to do an action or a reaction off of Star-Lord, Rocket, Groot, Agent Venom, and Drax. Or excuse me, Drax, not just Agent Venom. He doesn't get a reaction from himself, obviously. So just tons of options. Okay, now if we just want to scale this up from that wonderful 17 that we have, this scales extraordinarily well. You just add in Ghost Rider. You just get a ton of options here, but you're just trying to manage matchups. That's the most important thing on this particular crisis, okay? So we will go with the Deadly Duo. I think that's a great card on here. And in particular, another thing that you can really consider when you're looking at this stuff is, okay, if I play Deadly Duo, right, what's the most benefit I'm going to get from this? And if you look, like, we don't exactly have the best situation with terrain, and or like our opponent's going to be getting cover or other things going for it, unless we go over here and we kind of don't give ourselves cover or things for ourselves. Now, the benefit to going over to this flank is that there isn't going to be cover for anything around, trying to support it. They are going to have that, but honestly, if we're placing Rocket and Groot, I kind of want to be avoiding, having a size 4 as something that can really help finish off Groot. I'm kind of tempted at some points to not want to go to this side over here with a Rocket and Groot. Or one option is you can take a Rocket and Groot up the middle, have Bill go over here, so he can really be a threat with that size 4 terrain to be able to throw. So we're going to pretend that we've got ourselves a good matchup that allows us to bring in Agent Venom and do so pretty comfortably here at 19. Okay. So like I was saying, Sacrifice is going to be a great card on this crisis as well. And so when you're looking at these like 5 tactics cards and what this allows you to do, these are like basically S tier tactics cards, to be honest with you. And it's just a tremendous advantage anytime you can get this combination of things out on the table. But more importantly on this brawly crisis, right, we have just a ton of displacement, which is something that a lot of people with Guardians are not that familiar with, right? But Drax, size 3, throw superpower, size 4, size 3. He also has the ability to throw size 4 off of his only 3 power Titan Killer attack. So if Drax gets some damage on him and you have a Vengeance token, feel free to rip into that Hulk, and you're probably going to get yourself a size 4 throw. And on this Crisis, it's probably going into an opponent model. So this would be a really good 19. Again, entirely matchup dependent. So, as far as how we're playing Intrusions, we want to be able to win the middle and a flank. Okay? So, I've talked about how I don't necessarily always want to just lead out with my strongest model. Or my highest threat model. It's typically not a good idea in any way, shape, or form. And then, so a lot of times what people do is they'll lead out with their lowest threat models first. In my case, on this, I want to make sure that I'm trying to conceal my strategy as much as possible. And my strategy is, again, win this, or this, or this. But if I can win the middle, great. I just want to make sure that I'm contesting it, or sorry, win or tie the middle, then win a flank for sure. And I need to get my hands on some of these extracts. So, I like to lead out with Star-Lord, okay? Because he's not contributing to my secure strategy. He's just here to help me get my hands on one of these extracts and do so maybe in a safe manner. Now, one thing that you can't do on deployment is you can't actually bring out any other measurement tools, okay? So if you see people do this, like during deployment, or if they've done it during your games, this is actually illegal because it's not a size 3 tool, okay? Now, I can tell you that, if this starts out like before the game, maybe you can measure that. I don't know about that before you actually get to squad selection. So you might want to take a look at that there when you're trying to choose your board edge, right? One of the things that you run into on this map, and it's worth maybe discussing with your opponent, is, well, what happens if my model kind of sits on this and tilts, right? It's, he's still up there, but is it going to be considered good? I think it's kind of a moot point on this because of where the kind of measurement tool is off at, but you'll see I've got a bit of a gap there. So with Star-Lord, he's going to be able to make it. I will be completely honest with you guys. I've played on this map a few times. I do know that works. I was thinking about putting Star-Lord out here over the open, and it's like, you know what? Let's just make sure he has the cover, so that way we can get up there pretty safely. Opponent might counter with something. Again, a lot of people in MCP are gonna lead off with their lowest threat models first, or their models of least consequence, and then they'll go to their high models. So it could be that they just go in the center here. Who knows, right? All right. So for me, I now need to figure out, and this is kind of the decision that I need to make right now, is when do I want to deploy Rocket and Groot? Because they're so slow that I don't quite get the same benefit as I would of deploying like a Bill who I could put here and he could just double move and get to either of these. It doesn't work as well. I want both of them to be able to get up onto a point, and I want them both to be able to secure. Now, again, it's a tough decision because obviously this is a great piece of terrain, but they can't throw it. And odds are, if I'm putting down Rocket and Groot onto a spot, Bill is going to the other one. So if I put down Rocket and Groot here, Bill's going here. Okay? If I put Rocket and Groot down here, Bill's going here. In this particular instance, even though I love the fact that I can put, Groot over there, and he's not going to have, people are not going to have line of sight on him, and it makes a really safe turn one play. I think I can also accomplish that with Bill, except I can throw that terrain later. If I put Rocket and Groot in the center of the board, I think it opens up a range of possibilities with Deadly Duo. And it allows me to have two models up there. On the flip side of that, we're looking at a situation where the middle is usually where your opponent's strongest models are going to be. The ones with the best displacement, the highest hit point values, all of that stuff. So it's a real kind of tough situation here on how you want to handle this because of the way that the board's set up. And the reason why you don't want to have Rocket and Groot maybe going up against those models because their defense is good, and they just have that displacement, and they might not be able to. Rocket might not be able to daze somebody like maybe an opposing Bill or something, right? And when I say might, like, I don't think he gets it done in one activation without at least a Deadly Duo going into it. For example, dealing with a Malekith on this, Rocket's averaging maybe 0.7, I believe it is, a 5-dice attack going into him. 0.7 damage. So 2 attacks from Rocket, if you round up, you might be lucky to get 2 damage through, right? That's not counting a winging it reroll, but obviously you're going to have models getting thrown away by models like that. So because of this board being the way it is, I believe that we're going to want to hold off on our Rocket and Groot deployment. And so the real question is who do we go with? And I actually don't hate sending Drax up here. So our goal at this point now is to take Drax, and he's going to grab, this center extract and get up onto that secure, because he's going to have to double move to get up there, right? That should be able to free up an Agent Venom to grab this point later. And now, I've concealed what I'm kind of doing with my Rocket and Groot, and I've got some options here. Again, opponent's probably going to counter with doing something similar. You might see something over here depending on what model it is. They might bring more of a higher threat over there against like a Star-Lord or a faster model to be able to get after him a bit. It all just kind of depends. Ideally, in most games, you actually want to kind of delay your Agent Venom deployment. But if we're going to bring this particular squad of having 2 energy and 2 energy, I'm of the opinion that if we've brought this roster, that they probably don't have a lot of energy attacks. And what little energy attacks they do, it's either going into Agent Venom or Groot anyhow. So we can kind of afford to deploy them a little bit earlier and, just kind of accept that we might not get the perfect board side for them. So again, I've lined up just directly there. He's not going to have cover. He's not going to have any number of things. At the end of the day, Star-Lord is still more valuable because of the leadership. If somebody wants to come after him, they're not going to get a shot on turn 1 without different abilities or something to pull him in, or somebody like an Immortal Hulk that can, run across the board and start chucking him around, right? And if that happens, it's unfortunate. We'd have to be a little bit more mindful of maybe our board placement and maybe not play this so early. But if he wants to come running across the board like that, I think there's enough of a team around here to where we could probably kill that guy within like 2 rounds, realistically. So unless he decides to get out of there and they try to play that extract game. In either case, I think this is probably our best shot here because we haven't given away our game plan on the secures yet, right? Opponent counter doing whatever, and so here's where we really need to make our decision. And I think what we're going to want to do, as much as I don't like, not being able to have Groot and Rocket be able to throw that piece of terrain over there, I think we go here. I've changed my mind. Yeah, we'll just let Bill get to work. nah, it's just too much. If they're coming with a higher threat model, we need to have this guy in the middle of the board. A higher threat kind of large size model. He needs to be in the middle. Opponent will deploy. So what do we do with Rocket and Groot? I've mentioned that I don't like this. Now, if they don't have size 4 throws, cool. We're all about that, right? That is 100% going to be a great situation for Rocket and Groot. Now, I'm going to probably, before I, pull off Deadly Duo or before we get too crazy with things later in this game, obviously people don't get cover when dealing with Agent Venom, but I'm probably going to want to try to get rid of this size 4 terrain. I want to be able to get my Deadly Duo off and make sure people don't have cover. There shouldn't be too many models hovering around in that backspace. Now, if you've noticed, we've kind of just abandoned this point over here, okay? So when we're dealing with this crisis, or a lot of crises, I like to work lanes. We've talked about that in kind of the lane working video, or the lane video itself, and in Intrusions, which it lends to having natural lanes. Now, I understand that these portals are going to give people the ability to hop around and do all this other stuff, but more often than not, when you're going up against opponents, they're not running as aggressive a strategy as we are. They're trying to score points. A ton of teams in this game, probably like 75% of them, 80% of them, are point-scoring teams at their core, okay? So opponents, more often than not, they think about point scoring before they think about the things that I'm suggesting we think about, okay? Of course they're thinking about matchups, but they're thinking about, how can I go over here and score points and not die? When we're lining up models, I am thinking about, how can I kill your model? And then stop you from scoring points. And then if it's possible, I'll score some points myself, right? Very different mindset. And because of that, I'm willing to concede a point in its entirety. It allows people to, of course, portal around and do all this other stuff, but it still gives you a little bit of an advantage over them. And that little small advantage, if you want to know what it is, and it seems small, you're just forcing them to spend a power. And you're forcing them to have a model that's over there, and they're not doing something. If it's a team that comes with a bunch of layered defenses and abilities or bodyguards, if for some reason they've now ran a Luke Cage over there, well, by the time turn 2 rolls around, or excuse me, turn 1 or turn 2 rolls around, if he comes through that portal so he can go and get mixed up in the fight or something, he's only going to have 1 power, right? If he comes over here and hits some folks or does whatever, if it doesn't go well for him, he's just going to have less power. Now, which model's going to have to go back over there and help them score that point? It just takes layers of little things out, and it just slows models down a little bit, right? So that's all we're trying to do with this, and this is kind of the reason why I don't like this crisis a ton, is that it creates a little bit too much of a brawl, and we can't necessarily bully people the way that I'd prefer, okay? So we'll just get things rolling, moving into the turn 1. Winging It token distribution here is actually fairly important with this team, because we want to give people a little bit of pause in, how we might be deciding to kind of go about handling our team here. I think there are 2 models in particular that could be doing some decent work with these. Actually, I take that back. Whoop. Whoop. So maybe we want to give people the thought that, our rocket is going to, move once and then pop a shot. Maybe we want to give them the opinion that, we might be doing an attack with Bill or something, right? Maybe they've got a flight model. This is all just posturing, these Winging It tokens. I sincerely doubt that unless your opponent comes across the board at you in a very aggressive manner, that you're getting off any attacks this round, okay? So as far as like, who we're going with on turn 1, who the first person to activate is, we need to think about like our kind of least important model and the person least likely to get beat on. In this particular circumstance, because of this terrain being what it is, I think Groot is actually very safe to move up. So you just take him, move him up. And because of the way that this works, ideally we get as close to that as we possibly can. He doesn't make it all the way. But I think we can get there later. Either way, people are still going to need line of sight to deal with him. If you've noticed, I've placed him a little bit off center. It's because I just want to make sure that there's space for Rocket to be able to get in there. So that'll be your Groot on turn 1. He should be very safe from that position. Opponent might come back with an activation of their own, but it's probably not going to be what would have been their safest activation, because they see that you've planted a Winging It token on Rocket, and typically when people do that, it makes them think that you're going to be attacking. If that causes them to delay what is otherwise, in my opinion, their most obvious and safest activation, or like a flank model that, just might not be that tough or whatever, fine, right? If that can have them come up here and bring some up at the center of the board, maybe play more cautiously elsewhere, great. If it causes them to come over here and grab something, fine, right? That being said, I don't think we have any intention of attacking anyhow. This is just literally trying to slow some things down and give them some pause. So, another posturing thing that you can do with your Guardians team is you can take a look with Rocket, right? Sometimes you bring out some measurement tools. People will take a look at that. They'll see it. They think that you might just be eyeballing it to take a look at your range 5. Certainly a thing. And I think most really competitive players are probably going to realize that depending on what their model is and how many defensive dice they've got, going up on top of that on a turn 1 should be pretty safe. Now, depending on the model that they have, they might not be able to get on to the point. Okay? So if they've put a model over there that can't get onto the point at all, right, well then there might not be any necessity of bringing Groot over. And so what I mean by not being able to get onto the point at all, whoops, let's show that off real quick, is that if they have somebody like, we'll just use a Drax, the traitorous Drax, they do have to climb on that, right? So you got Drax, does his medium move. He's going to have to come straight directly there. Now, he gets there, sure. But can he reach this point? No. So if he wants to contest that point, he's not getting cover. And this is kind of what I was talking about. Is like, if they're going to be able to reach it or not. So, even with having to climb, he gets there. So, you having ability to have a Rocket sitting back there, pretty good. So, either way, it just isn't going to be the intention of this game at all anyhow. So, they could come over here. You do have the ability to tear a little bit of that with an Agent Venom. We're not going to be able to get an attack off and reach this in one turn anyhow. So, it's kind of irrelevant. So which model do we send up next? We have the ability to deter this with Rocket, right? So we can say and hold some pause there. Who do we want to send up? And how do we decide about going and doing that? Well, it depends on what they've got on their side over here. If they've got an entire team of ranged models, we probably don't want to mess with it with Drax. If they've got like Winter Soldier back there, he could be getting one through on that. Now, if we send a Bill up, that's all well and good, because like on our first attack, if we have cover there and that damage reduction, it's probably not doing any damage. I would say there's probably like 75% chance it's doing 0 damage. But you're still going to have to spend that power more than likely to get that reduced down. So if you're having to do that, they're going to end up on 0 power at the end of this turn. Only 2 to start off next round. Not ideal. So we don't want to just give them free pot shots. But there is something to be said for maybe setting that up later and allowing them to have those pot shots. Now, again, depending on what they've got going on with their team over there. If they have a Cosmic Ghost Rider, we need to be very careful about who we send forward and which ones we do that with, right? If there is a Cosmic Ghost Rider, somebody that can, double move up here and then throw somebody backwards or do whatever, I'd be tempted to send up a Drax. Except I wouldn't do it in a way that would move him past that car. And I wouldn't, if I send up a model this early, I would not grab this as well. Because it just puts too much of a target on their head, and they could just get kind of dogpiled on, and it might make it worth it for an opponent not to go after this secure here in round 1. What I would like to try to be able to do is to get them to kind of give away some of their game plan, or in an ideal world, if they just bring a model up and they don't do anything with them and they just kind of set them up to do something, that's great. Okay. One of the benefits of this is that we can be wider than most teams. So I think it allows us to get good numbers on the secures and still getting our hands on all these extracts as well, whereas a lot of other teams are potentially not going to have this benefit. So that is one way to consider this, is that if they bring up a model after that Groot activation and they just grab one of these secures real quick, or extracts, then you could be looking at a situation where, they've got maybe 4 activations left, and we can afford to wait off on this middle a little bit more, and we can take up an Agent Venom. So it's really, really dependent on what your opponent's doing. So as you can see, I think this would probably be our safest activation. At the end of the day, he's an important model. He's still not as important as Star-Lord, and I don't think on this particular crisis that he's important as Drax or Bill. I get that he's a 4 threat. He's got a great kit, but Drax actually has an extraordinary amount of value on this because of his kit and just how tough he is. Our MVPs this game's on crisis like this are going to be Bill and Drax. They're just going to be the guys that are going to be towing the line and making things possible for us, and you can see that by how we're asking them to come here up in the middle of this board and hold things down. So before I make my second move, there's a couple of things I want to consider. And most importantly, when I'm considering this, I want to be able to see how much coverage I can get over these secures. Okay. Now, there are a couple of ways to kind of jank this stuff, but that's pretty good. That's going to give me, from the furthest point there, I could go all the way here, and I'm going to get full coverage of that secure. Right? That's not a problem in the world. Other thing is, obviously, if I come over here, I've got this covered. So, if I've got this covered, and the other, just from going to about roughly there, the biggest thing that I need to be concerned myself with is, do I open myself up to range 3 attacks from this one? And the answer is yes. Okay. So I'm going to probably be more likely to kind of try to shade away from that a little bit. Right, so that's roughly going to be a range 3 reach off of that for a model. So I am going to be wanting to be like probably here. Because that's not the side that I want. I don't want there to have a model that can just sit there and do things. Do you see what I'm saying? I just don't want that. Ideally what I want is, for them to maybe commit a model here, and I want to be able to cover this. If I can reach this, that's a bonus. I just don't want them to be able to sit there with a range model and attack. Now, if they don't have a range model and they only have range 2, well, cool, go bananas, right? basically placed so you can have the best of all worlds and attack all points. But we're going to pretend that they've at least got a range 3. Okay, so my real goal here is to provide coverage over the middle. So we've moved him up because an opponent came up, grabbed that. You might have another opponent that's going to come up, grab this one. They're going to have cover there. That's a pretty good spot to be if you're just going to grab an extract. I don't think you're going to see those kind of higher threat beef models coming up yet. And so here we are as far as we're trying to figure out, you know, what do we want to do with this round. If they've done an offset deployment, which I think they would want to do, you could see a situation where somebody, you know, could maybe move up there and, you know, try to get onto this point, maybe leave another model to grab that. But one of the things about senators that really works in our favor on this and on this particular crisis is that, you know, only one move action. So if they grab that senator after moving up, they're stuck. So, you know, gets us a good chance to win the secures. All right. All that stuff being said, you know, I'm not sure exactly what an opponent's going to do. It really depends on the team. I think our second safest action here is Star-Lord. He's in a really nice little spot up here for himself. I think he's going to be happier than a pig in crap, right? Looks like we got a little bit of wiggle room on how we want to get him fully cinched in up here. That's about as good as we're going to get. All right. That's about as good as we're going to get. So you got all that. Now, opponent could come up here. I don't know if they're going to come up onto the bus or if they're going to come straight up there. If they come straight up over, that's fine. The real goal, again, is we need to win this point. Rocket actually isn't attacking here. I don't want to just have this be a tie. So we talked a lot about, you know, doing backstopping and all that other stuff in other videos. You can still do that here. It just doesn't work as well because you need to have Rocket get up onto the point. So we're going to try to do it in a way to where Root can't be thrown all the way backwards. We're not going to probably have a ton of success. It's probably our best angle right there. The good thing about having this, at least this particular angle, peculiar TTS thing, okay, is that at least if Groot gets thrown, he's going to be having to go, you know, over here. If that actually is a Drax, this is the only angle that they're going to get on that. Might even have to be a little bit more extreme than that, as far as like a little bit more that direction. So you can kind of see what I'm saying. There is some backstopping potential there. The other thing that this provides is it does give Rocket a little bit of coverage over the center of the board. A question that might come up, as you can see, that I've only got coverage over 1 point with Rocket, and it's like, well, wouldn't this be more powerful if you had him in the middle and he could cover more stuff? Yeah, absolutely. But like I've mentioned a few times, that's going to be the spot where you're going to find a Hulk. That's going to be the spot where you're going to find the Malekiths. That's going to be the spot where Bill's going to be. That's going to be all these other models that can just pick up your Rocket and your Groot and just throw them apart from each other. And then just go to town on these guys individually. And I just don't think you want that. You're going to find most of those tough models that Rocket cannot one round in the center of the board. It's not necessarily about them being able to attack as many things this round or any rounds later as it is about having the two of them being able to be on a point together, and being able to utilize their kind of combined strength to work that point and survive longer, right? So now is where we want to start leading out with our Bill, right? He's going to be our toughest model. Opponent's going to counter, doing whatever. They could grab this. That's fine. Depending on the model, again, more likely they're going to be trapped there. So you take your Bill, you move up. I actually don't want to be grabbing the extract with Bill. I think encouraging people to attack Drax is ideal. If that gets Drax killed quicker, fine. If we can force that to happen while Bill gets to sit here and we get to use his throw longer in the game and control this game a lot more and just use him for his skill set longer, that's fine. And on this particular one, I'm probably going to go a little bit more off-center here because I want to try to make room for Drax to be able to kind of come up here and get as far forward on that as possible. I want him to be able to also fit in next to that car. Opponent's probably only 5 wide. So we could get this for free as well. Or at least safely. And cool. Like I said, Drax is just going to fit in right there. And he will grab this. And we've saved Bill's power by doing that as well, which is a pretty big deal. So that is your turn 0, turn 1 kind of plan of action with this Guardians team on Senator's Intrusions. I don't love this crisis. If something came along that was equally low scoring and less brawly, if they didn't have the teleportation factor, I'd love it. That teleportation could come in really big later in this game. And then, I love it. This is the best thing in the world because I get across the board and I get to kill people. This was a fantastic crisis back to have in your secure arsenal back in the day of single extracts because you could get from one side of the board to the other and really catch up to people in a pinch. I think it's kind of lost some of its luster, and its real only appeal is that it's just a low point total. Again, if you go and you just focus on winning 2 of these to the maximum extent possible, you can set yourself up in a way to really be able to kind of cover this center, cover down on it, get it killed up. And if you've got an opponent that's having a model just sit over there, it's not much, but it is some advantage, okay? If they, attack you twice and rotate a tough model from here and rotate them over here, that's fine, right? Because at the end of the day, they're still having to spend 2 power in order to get back from a minimum of 2 power to get back from there to back here. And even on some of the best power generating models in the game, it's just a power tax, right? It's essentially like a free poison on people. And it might not seem like much, but the more that you can get people to waste doing that, especially early on in the game, while you've been able to at least be, what's our magical plan with these Guardians team, to be -1 on extracts or secure, or not -1 or secure, but -1 on extracts or equal, and equal or above in secures. That's always typically the plan. And again, the reason for that is because when you establish good position on secures, you're establishing dominant positions on secures, and you're establishing your way of playing the game. When you have the dominant board positions and you're winning those, it allows you to kind of dictate where models end up on the board and all that other stuff, and where the fight's going to take place, and everything else a lot better. And so it just works out better for an aggressive team. And yeah, that's really the plan here on Intrusions, Senators. I'll be doing another video series. I'll probably, just go through all these crises for Guardians, and we'll drop some different little strategy type things in between. I'm trying to work out a time to get a hold of one of my really good buddies to essentially just play part of a mock game so that I can at least show you guys what I mean about as far as trying to avoid matchups or how to read a roster, right? And when you're reading a roster, biggest thing that you really have to kind of know is like, what's the meta, right? I know that's a word that gets thrown a lot around, but what are the meta plays? Like, what are the tactics? Like, not everybody has time to understand and know all these things, right? So if you really want to know this stuff and to have yourself that competitive edge, like, I got to be honest with you, like, you got to kind of know what these trends are and what they look like and get in reps, right? If you're going to be playing in local tournaments, getting to know what local players' tendencies are and what they like to bring, like what your local meta is, and that's where you start to counter stuff. Even at the local stuff, if it might seem like it's like, oh, they'll never do that. Well, if they've done it 7 times to you before, like, and it might be like an obscure play or somebody from a podcast, or if I tell you that it's bad, but they've done it 7 times before, like, that's the meta for them, right? That's what they're going to be doing. That's what they think is good, and that's what you're going to see a lot of. That's going to be the prevailing tactics that's being attempted to win games in your local meta. So you kind of need to know that within yourself already. And if it's online play, you're going to see a lot more of the kind of more consensus, sweaty, try-hard metas and models that they're going to bring, what I try to call the real cancerous stuff, right? The Malekith Red Skull combinations and Cabal at 15 threat, and just amazing Mystique Brotherhood plays and these exotic X-Men hops to give yourself the ability to have a free and safe extract grab like almost every conceivable way, right? So if you guys have any questions or whatever, feel free to hit me up on Discord, as I'm just the Barn Cat. You can leave a comment on these videos. I'm probably going to be a lot more responsive again on Discord. So hopefully this is helpful. I changed up a bit of the order on things and try to make this a little bit less busy. It is kind of tough to explain it all because this is not the most straightforward crisis. But I didn't just want to leave it to, well, you need to know what your opponent's going to do, and you need to know how to counter it. Like, it's not. That makes that sound really easy, but it's not. Like, so it's kind of go through the nuance of all that to kind of help people read that a little bit, especially if you're going to put a model like an Agent Venom and Groot out there together in a combination like this. Like, you've got to kind of know what you're dealing with and that you can get away with it. Otherwise, if you try to employ some of these tactics that I've talked about, or this aggressive play, you're just going to get beat up and killed, especially on a crisis like this. All right, well, that is it. Hopefully, again, this is helpful for you guys. Cheers.